Thank you so much for that introduction. Honestly, I feel very humbled to be invited to come here. And I thank Jude Mary, and other organizers who have helped me to get here and to find the place and get everything set up. Really, I feel like I should just abandon my talk and continue on some of the themes we've raised already. You know, there's so much has been discussed today. I've learned a huge amount coming here. And I think your comments and your talks have been extremely helpful to me. I can't promise revolutionary ideas, but I can promise how we're trying to change some things. I mean, we recognize in our team that our services are not suitable for many people we try to help, and we recognize they were created for a certain kind of person through a long evolution of history. And this is something that I can't change immediately, but we're trying to. I'll give you a quick example. We were trying to decide, should we have in our questionnaires, should we ask about racism explicitly, or should we let it emerge just according to the people's own words and comments? There was a division in our services. Some of our Black partners wanted explicit questioning, wanted the question to be out front and open. Some other members of our team wanted equipoise to rule the day and wanted a different kind of an approach. You could argue, as Amar was saying, that it's sort of a black and white tension in the team, which is what we're trying to purposely inject into our services. So this is all very important, I think. I think if I click here, this can advance. Okay. Oh, sorry, I wanted to do this to a land affirmation. Can you use that as well? Oh, can you all hear me, by the way? It's okay? You can hear? Okay, great. So I'm going to try to keep this to 30 minutes. Okay. All right. So land affirmation is so important. And I love the talk today where there was some Indigenous concepts brought into the discussion about Black communities. It was really affirming to me. I never have conflicts of the traditional kind, financial conflicts, but I do have my own points of view. I'm generally very pro-migration. I'm very pro-diversity, but those are sort of my own ways of approaching things. I have to be transparent. You might ask, why is someone like me interested in issues of racism? And I have to be honest. I come from a Latter-day Saint, Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saint community, known as the Mormons more often. I was raised in Western Canada in a very white environment. I didn't know any Black people of color, except for one Japanese co-student of mine until I was probably in my 19 or 20, when, as a member of my church, I served a mission in Paris. Here's a picture from the 80s. And there I met many people from all around the world, including, I made some very beautiful African friends. We've been friends ever since. 40 years later, we're still in contact. And it was through their friendship and the love I had for them that I realized the predicament they were living, and that they would tell me about their Black experience, and an experience I didn't live myself, and I've never been able to understand fully. So I just wanted to let you know how I came to study this field and how important it became to me. And I was born out of this love I had for the people that I had met as a young man in a foreign country. You all know what psychosis is, I think, but I'll talk about the predicament of Black communities vis-a-vis psychosis and schizophrenia, which has been a very difficult thing for, I think, hundreds of thousands of people around the world. We'll talk about high rates of psychosis very briefly in people of African descent in different countries. In the United States, psychosis and schizophrenia and being of African origin has a very long, twisted political history. And before the Civil War, you probably know that slaves in the South of the United States were felt to have no mental health problems because they were being cared for in the proper way and they were assuming their proper social position. It was people who escaped, who went to the northern states and later were freed after emancipation, who came down with high rates of schizophrenia, insanity at the time, and other social ills. So it kind of falls into what Amar has been saying, and others today very closely. This is just an example from that time. Someone writing about the census. The 1840 census became highly contested in the United States. This person writes, I send you a copy of a few items from a statistical table which I compiled some years ago from the US Census of 1840 and published in a country newspaper without obtaining much notice, although it exhibits in a most striking light the amazing prevalence of insanity and idiocy among our free colored population over the whites and the slaves. So among the free black population, this is an alarming finding. And then someone named Edward Jarvis, no relation to me that I know, from Boston area. People always think that it's me because my first name's Eric and the E. Jarvis is the same. It's very confusing. They say, how are you writing papers in the 1850s? Anyway, so he says, he went and looked at all this data and said it was ridiculous. Soon, however, the data appeared to be so contrary to all previous experience and observations that some were led to examine into the character of the authority on which the tables were founded and discover that the whole of the statements in reference to the disorders of the colored race were a mere mass of error and totally unworthy of credit. He would go to places in, say, Massachusetts, where there were supposed to be 3 insane freed slaves and find there were no black people living there at all. So it was very bizarre. Someone had falsified the data. So this all became politicized. The rates of insanity, which later became psychosis, were essentially just justifying slavery or justifying segregation, justifying the inferior position that black people had in the United States. So this problem has gone throughout the US history, very complicated. In the UK, an equally complex history. This is a terrible picture of the Zulu Wars in the 1870s in Africa. But the conflict mode, the mode of conflict, has sort of persisted in the UK system vis-a-vis how to understand schizophrenia in migrants to the UK from the former colonies. So there's a real drive. Many studies have found high rates of schizophrenia, especially in people from West Africa and the Caribbean. And for me, there's a long, complicated story, but for me, it highlights a systemic racist perspective. Suman Fernando, a very senior psychiatrist in the UK of color, talks about how black schizophrenia became ensconced in the UK in the post-war period. So over about a 60-year period, we can discuss this at great length, but it's of importance to know about it today. Canada and other countries, this same systemic bias goes through the literature. And even in a study that we did comparing rates of hospitalized black patients in Montreal to a similar hospital in Padua, Italy, we found that after controlling for everything we could, there was still an increased number of black people being admitted for schizophrenia and psychosis in both sites. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Like, how could this possibly be? Padua and Montreal are very different places, different languages, different histories, but the same finding persisted. And so it kind of is exposing a systemic problem that we've been talking about today. Some of these observed high rates of psychosis in black people may be due to misdiagnosis. In fact, we did a study here in the Cultural Consultation Service in 2012 and found that about 49%, almost 50%, of the black patients referred to our Cultural Consultation Service who were referred for psychosis had their diagnosis reassigned to something else after we did a thorough cultural consultation. So it shows the magnitude of the error. We'll talk a bit about coercion. We've talked about this before today already quite a bit, I think, coercion and blacks with psychosis, because this is really where the rubber hits the road. It's not just wordplay anymore. It really affects real people and real lives, these misdiagnoses or excess diagnoses that may be occurring. So sadly, there are some times where coercion is needed in mental health. Some people really are dangerous. They kill people and commit suicide. So there is a role for coercion. appropriate coercion in psychiatry. The problem is, because of the long history of coercion in Black communities, by white societies in particular, this gets played out in a very destructive manner. This is some of the historical issues. I think I'm just watching my time. So in the UK, for example, Craig Morgan did some very important work early, about 20 years ago or so. He says this: somewhere along the line, and for unclear reasons, greater numbers of African Caribbeans enter care via the police and under compulsion than do whites, such that African Caribbeans have a more coercive relationship with mental health services in the UK, in his case. But this was all replicated again in later studies, ESOP and so on. Black Canadians, this is probably not a slide you need to see. You know a lot about this. Just to let you know that Black Canadians in Canada, the numbers of Black Canadians are growing quite quickly. 4.3% of the population now, and it's anticipated to double or so in the next several years. Coercion in Black Canadians. You also know, sadly, that Canada thinks of itself as kind of being immune from these problems, but Canada is not immune, and Canada has many shortcomings with respect to its immigrant, migrant, and racialized communities. We did a study a long time ago now that simply found, we were trying to show that something was happening in a Canadian setting. So in Montreal, we did find that over a one-year period, that more Black people with schizophrenia or psychosis were arrived at the emergency department by ambulance or police than other members of other groups. Another study a bit later on, more recently, we looked at our cultural consultation service over the first 15 years of its existence. We found that our Black patients that were referred to us reported more coercive events in their lives compared to other groups. It could have been, it was kind of overall coercion, whereas Asian people that were referred to our group, especially those from South Asia, reported less migration coercion. We weren't really sure what to make of that. Sometimes people don't report things because it's too difficult or too taboo, or there are other perils in reporting that could complicate the refugee application. But these were interesting and important findings, again, that kind of fit in with this overall pattern I'm discussing. Summer Knight is here in the audience. A few years ago was working with us and did a nice master's project and published a couple of papers with our team and kind of confirmed some of these findings, but her findings showed more of a problem. Black communities in their interaction, members of Black communities with psychotic disorders, and their interaction with legal services is where the excess coercion took shape. So in people who were, say, on court orders, community court orders ordained by the court, for example, that kind of intervention Black people seem to be especially at risk for. She had also a kind of a qualitative follow-up to some of the quantitative study. Here's what one person told her: "The police told me to drop the knife, but I didn't realize it was happening. The situation escalated very quickly, and I end up walking, and the police just hit me with the car, and I dropped the knife at that moment, and they handcuffed me." Or we can read the first one here, a theme of mistrust. "I don't know at the core of everything. I really don't trust being in the hospital because of the forced treatment and all these things, being poked with needles and still going on. It just feels like an invasion sometimes." And that was the title of the paper that Summer Knight wrote, taken from this quotation. We talked about the Black community, members of the Black community, their position vis-a-vis rates of psychosis, the political nature of this diagnosis. We talked a bit about coercion, which has been well discussed today. But there's a third aspect to kind of cover, if we have a bit more time, and that's about beliefs about psychosis, before I go into maybe a little more hopeful part of the talk about what we're trying to do to make things different. So this is an unpublished review of English West African attitudes about psychosis. number of emergent themes from 104 papers are presented here. And you can see some of the cultural beliefs that came through these papers. These are not papers written by Black people, maybe very few of them. Some of them might be. We talk about cultural beliefs, spiritual causes of psychosis, the role of religion and faith and stigma, traditional healers and faith-based healing, and then again, problems accessing services. So we did these number of reviews as part of a larger project to see how we need to change our services to make them much more compatible and friendly and appropriate so everyone can benefit the same. And let me just play, this is an example of some of our focus groups. Is this good? So we're not trying to say that this is what everybody believes or what this person can't speak for everyone, obviously, but it's just these kinds of discussions, interviews, we're having focus groups and so on. They just remind us how important spirituality might be to some people, especially in Black communities in this case. And so we just realized from that what we're totally missing addressing this world and this potential addition to the assessment that we try to do for our patients, for our families. This is another quotation about mistrust of health systems. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, though. Do we have, how much time do we have? C'est combien de minutes qui reste? 10 minutes? Oh, 5. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and skip over this one. But I'm just saying there's tons of amazing. Now, we did a recent review. Again, Summer Knight was one of the authors about a scoping review of attitudes of English Caribbean people about psychosis. Found a number of different themes, thematic material, and so on. I can play one of these quotations for you just so you can see an example of the problematic position some people find themselves in. That is so important, and we realize from these kinds of comments and conversations that we don't look like the people that some of our patients need and are looking for. And we're acutely aware, and it's really, we need to find ways to work through these differences by being open and by having honest discussions and not shying away from the difficult topics that people are raising that are important to them. So what can we do to make things a little bit different? I'm not promising a revolution. It may not be fast enough for some, but we hope it'll have some impact, and I think it is having some impact already. We can take a stand. We can be culturally humble. We can be culturally safe. And we can culturally adapt our practices and our services. We've tried to take a stand by papers like this, A Call to Action, Canadian Psychiatric Association Journal, Taking Action on Racism, which talks about meso, micro, and macro changes that can be made to the racist environment that we practice in. One of Jude Mary Sena's commentaries for the Canadian Psychiatric Association Journal about the burden of psychosis on Black families. We can take a stand and raise our voices as much as we can in whatever sphere we live in, whatever sphere we occupy. We've already talked about cultural humility today. I think it's probably the most important quality of cultural competence that we can work on as clinicians and as members of our society. I'll just read, here. Moving away from cultural competence, I'll just read this to you. These authors write in 2020, although striving to become humble is challenging, claiming that we can achieve competence in any culture is untrue and dangerous. The recent appreciation of implicit bias and intersectionality signals the need to abolish the notion of cultural competence and prioritize the development of humility to begin dismantling racism to address health disparities. to a call to humility. Cultural safety is an indigenous concept. I came out of New Zealand, but as practitioners, we can strive to make our offices, our clinics, our hospitals, wherever our research environments safe for the people that come there. And when I go out to our community partners, to their activities, I don't always feel comfortable. And I think that's a good thing. So I think that by doing that, I'm learning what it is to come into someone else's space and make that part of my home too. That's a process we need to undergo as human beings. Cultural adaptations is the last part I'll talk about. I know you're probably wanting me to shut down soon. 3 ways I've tried as a scholar and as a psychiatrist to adapt my practices through cultural consultation, family psychoeducation, and first episode psychosis programs in Black communities. Cultural consultation is the last 25 years. It's essentially, we offer our services to anybody who has a difficulty with language, with a religious component in mental health. If a patient is concerned about racism, we'll try to help as well. If they have a problem with the police or these. So we just essentially are there to support and to also to empower the referring clinical teams so they know how to work with diversity, and to ask the important questions, not to shy away from the difficult issues. Culturally adaptive family psychoeducation, we introduced some content changes into how we teach people about psychosis, especially family members. So it has been an evolutionary process. It's been difficult because there's so much biomedical information to convey. We've cut back on the biomedical. We've increased the lived experience content and introduced some of the problems and issues from the focus groups that I've mentioned to you today, to try to give people permission to be able to talk to us about what really is at stake for them. For example, adding in under environmental stress, causing psychosis, migrating to a new country, and living with racism and discrimination. Or making room for cultural explanations, saying, instead of just talking about dopamine and about general stresses in life, we might say, well, some people have other ideas about the causes of psychosis, spiritual or religious problems, or family problems like being disobedient to parents, for example. The important part is we hope you will feel comfortable to share your opinions and beliefs concerning psychosis symptoms with your FEP team, with the psychosis team. So the thing is, in the actual seminar, the psychoeducation seminar, it may start a discussion or it may not, but at least people who are attending will have permission to talk about those issues with their team members, and they'll know that it's been mentioned and that people are open and aware that those might be important problems for them or issues for them. And this is just going the same, making room for cultural treatments. And okay, this is our most recent project, and the last thing I'll talk about. Our new project now was really designed and was funded to completely redesign and reshape early psychosis services specifically for Black communities in Montreal. So what we've done so far is we've tried to reach out. We want to make psychosis services a friendlier and different environment, maybe changing the location where we practice, maybe changing the kinds of language we use. We wanted a grounded community focus. The project was launched in March 2024, and we had food and games and music. We talked about what's at stake for people. People seemed very happy from the research team, from our community partners about how things went. It's a co-production to share power, and building a co-creation community is the long term. So some of our pictures from this event, the community spaces is at the Jamaica Association of Montreal. There are students, our community partners, including Myrna Lashley, who you met here, and Sharon Nelson from Montreal, some of you might know. My wife and I having a moment eating stuff with Charlotte Wint. I wasn't sure what to do. That's a good place to start. I was a bit bewildered about some things happening. And here's Myrna and Cynthia Waith at the event as well, and some other people. It's about becoming part of a process. It's seeking broad consultation, listening when someone says there's a problem. If they don't like the title of your project, change it. Ask them what's better, change it. If they don't like the way that your work style is, or they think that your clinic is too cold or weird, or you're not using the right terms to explain things, listen to that and start changing things. It can really work. We've worked hard to do that. So in review, acknowledge that problems exist, lift our voices, the best that we can, whatever way we can, practice humility and safety, and culturally adapt our services. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jarvis. We are running short of time. Let's go straight. Take 2 questions. Yes. Voulez-vous vous mettre là pour répondre, s'il vous plaît?
Hi, Dr. Jarvis. Very nice presentation. You're doing a lot, but then I'm wondering how, as a scholar, you are advocating for or partnering with Black people or people of color to improve opportunities for more scholars in like psychosis services and things like that, like students who want to study more, because we don't have a lot. And from one of the slides you presented, the Caribbean mom was complaining about there was distrust. She didn't trust the person who didn't look like her, who didn't understand her experience. So how are you partnering or advocating and helping more Black people come into this field so those they are offering services for can trust them more? And maybe that might be a situation,
something to do, something to help. But you're totally right. And what I did during the pandemic, after George Floyd, it was a moment where I told our administrators, I said, you know, we don't have any people of color on our teams. This is crazy. Like we're ignoring maybe more than half of our patient population. So since then, they've hired several people from Black communities to work on our team. We have one on our team now, and I've hired several also in our research group as well. And we have been able to extend out, I think, better now, better because of that. We have a little bit different face. I mean, I'm not the best person to approach Black communities just because of who I am, right? I come across as being Mr. McGill or something. So, and that's kind of, I understand that. So, I mean, we try to be honest and straightforward. And I'll just tell people that, that I know I'm not the best, but they still might ask me to come talk. Also at some outreach community events. The Caramas Sizzle in Montreal last July, they asked me to come give a talk from the bandstand after the parade, It was a very different experience. And I spoke as loud as I could into the microphone, and I couldn't hear myself because there was so much music going on and stuff. So it was a very different setting for me. So I think but these are the kind of things we have to start doing, I think. And so there are things we can do. And I think it's made a little difference so far, but I think there's much more to do, And some teams have been blessed with more diversity than others. So anyway, excellent. If you have suggestions, please let me know. We'll be very happy to hear your input. So
you mentioned that you have people on your research team. Are they getting co-authorship opportunities with you?
Yeah, for sure. Everybody on the team who are students, we have students. Not right now. Right now I don't have a student from the African communities, and right now this time in the past have, and hope to have more coming. And anybody who works on the team will get equal partnership for sure.